The screaming void between dimensions tore open like a festering wound, reality bleeding crimson fire across the darkness of space. Something fell through that cosmic rent, trailing hellfire and shadow, plummeting toward a universe that had forgotten the meaning of mercy 10,000 years ago. The entity that descended was no stranger to damnation, but even Simmons, the Hellspawn known as Spawn, had never witnessed corruption on the scale that awaited him in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. Have you ever wondered what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? When a being forged in hell's furnaces encounters a galaxy where hell itself would seem like a vacation resort? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most insane crossovers imaginable, exploring what would happen if Spawn, the undead soldier turned supernatural anti-hero, found himself thrust into the nightmarish reality of Warhammer 40,000. But before we unleash this chaos, let me tell you why this matchup is absolutely perfect. Spawn isn't just another superhero with a dark edge. He's a being literally powered by hellish energy, wielding chains forged in damnation itself, commanding an army of the undead, and possessing strength that can reshape reality. Meanwhile, Warhammer 40 Kelvins is a universe where literal demons pour through rifts in space-time, where faith itself becomes a weapon, and where the very act of existing is a constant battle against forces that would drive mortals insane just by looking at them. What makes this even more fascinating is that I've spent months researching both universes, analyzing their power systems, their mythologies, their fundamental rules of existence. I've consulted with lore experts from both franchises, and what I discovered will completely blow your mind. The interactions between Spawn's necroplasmic powers and the warp, the reaction of the Imperium to his presence, the way Chaos Gods would respond to a being who literally escaped hell itself. It's all going to be covered in excruciating detail. And here's the kicker. By the end of this multi-part series, you'll understand not just how Spawn would survive in this universe, but how his very presence would fundamentally alter the balance of power in ways that even the Emperor himself couldn't predict. Trust me, the implications go way deeper than you think. So let's set the stage. Warhammer 40 Kelvin's universe is a place properly. The humanity see to die, where hope goslings to existence under the boot of the most oppressive regime imaginable, the Imperium of Man, ruled by a corpse god sitting on a throne of pure agony for 10 millennia. Space Marines, genetically enhanced super soldiers, barely hold the line against threats that include galaxy-devouring aliens, reality-warping demons, and their own fallen brothers turned to chaos. It's a universe where the act of faster-than-light travel requires navigating through a dimension of pure nightmare, where psychers must be sacrificed by the thousands daily just to keep the lights on, and where the standard greeting includes prayers for the Emperor's protection because you genuinely might not survive the conversation. Into this hellscape drops Simmons, but not the Simmons who died in that alley. No, this is Spawn at the height of his power, after he's broken free from both heaven and hell's control, after he's commanded legions of the damned, after he's literally of existence itself. His rewritten the rules necroplasmic suit isn't just armor, it's a living symbiote with its own malevolent intelligence. His chains aren't just weapons, they're extensions of his will that can reach across dimensions. His cape isn't just fabric, it's a portal to realms that exist beyond mortal comprehension. The moment Spawn materializes in Imperial space, everything changes. Astropaths across entire sectors suddenly start bleeding from their eyes, not from chaos corruption, but from something else entirely. Something that registers as neither daemon nor Xenos, but as a fundamental wrongness that their psychic senses can't categorize. The Emperor himself, locked in his eternal vigil on the Golden Throne, turns his attention toward this new anomaly with something approaching curiosity, because for the first time in millennia, he's encountering a soul that has walked through hell and emerged not corrupted, but purified through absolute defiance. But here's where it gets really interesting. Spawn doesn't just appear randomly. The dimensional rift that brings him to this universe tears open directly above a world called Mortuus Prime, a cemetery planet where the Imperium buries its most honored dead. The symbolism is perfect, because Spawn is fundamentally a being of death and resurrection, and his arrival awakens something that's been sleeping beneath the necropolis for thousands of years. The planetary governor, Lord Commander Vex, watches from his fortress cathedral as the impossible figure descends from the burning sky. His augmetic eye, blessed by the Mechanicus, tries to process what it's seeing and simply fails. The readings make no sense. The being registers as both living and dead, both blessed and damned, both human and something utterly alien. When Spawn's boots finally touch the consecrated soil of Mortuus Prime, the very ground begins to smoke, not from corruption, but from the meeting of two incompatible forms of divine power. The first inhabitants of this world to encounter Spawn are a patrol of Death Corps of Krieg soldiers, men so devoted to death in service of the Emperor that they wear skull masks and consider survival a failure of duty. They should open fire immediately upon seeing this clearly non-human entity. Instead, something in Spawn's presence speaks to their death-obsessed souls. When he looks at them through the glowing green orbs of his eyes, they see not an enemy, but a kindred spirit who has walked through death and emerged victorious. The sergeant, a veteran who has never spoken above a whisper in 30 years of service, finds his voice cracking as he attempts to challenge this apparition, but Spawn doesn't respond with violence. Instead, he studies these soldiers with something approaching recognition. These men understand what he understands, that death is not an ending but a transformation, that true service requires sacrifice beyond what the living can comprehend. What happens next defies every protocol in the Imperial Guard manual. The Death Corps soldiers don't attack. They don't retreat. They kneel. Not in submission, but in recognition of something they've been seeking their entire lives without knowing it. A master of death who doesn't serve chaos, who doesn't bow to any god, who has claimed dominion over his own damnation through pure force of will. Word of this encounter spreads through the Imperial communication networks like wildfire, but the reports make no sense. Conflicting accounts describe everything from a new form of Daemon Prince to a lost Primarch returned from the dead. Inquisitor Mordian Vex of the Ordo Malleus receives the initial reports while investigating a separate Chaos incursion 3 systems away, and immediately recognizes that this is something unprecedented. The Inquisitor has spent 2 centuries studying the nature of Chaos corruption, has witnessed the birth of Daemon Princes, has stood in the presence of greater daemons, and lived to tell about it. But the descriptions he's receiving don't match any known category of threat. This being demonstrates power comparable to a Daemon Prince, but shows no signs of chaos taint. It commands the dead, but not through necromancy. It exists partially outside normal reality, but not through warp manipulation. Meanwhile, on Mortuus Prime, Spawn begins to understand the true horror of the universe he's found himself in. His enhanced senses detect the psychic screams of 1 trillion tortured souls, the weight of despair that crushes hope before it can take root, the sheer scale of suffering that spans entire galaxy arms. But rather than being overwhelmed, something in his undead heart responds with familiar rage. This is injustice on a cosmic scale, and Simmons has never been able to ignore injustice. The cemetery world holds secrets that even the Imperium has forgotten. Beneath the endless graveyards lie the remains of soldiers who died in the first wars against chaos, their bones still radiating faith so pure it burns like starfire. When Spawn's presence touches these ancient graves, something impossible happens. The dead don't rise as shambling corpses or warp-twisted abominations. Instead, they manifest as spectral warriors, their forms composed of equal parts necroplasmic energy and imperial faith, creating something that has never existed before in either universe. These aren't zombies or daemons. They're something new entirely. Warriors who died in service to the Emperor but have been touched by Spawn's power, given form and purpose that transcends both death and corruption. They retain their memories, their personalities, their unwavering loyalty to the Imperium, but now they exist in a state that makes them immune to fear, to pain, to the corrupting influence of chaos itself. The first company of these spectral soldiers manifests around Spawn like an honor guard he never asked for, but finds himself accepting. They don't speak, but their intent is clear. They recognize in him something their living selves never encountered, a being who has conquered death not through service to dark gods, but through absolute refusal to surrender his essential humanity. As reports of these events reach the highest levels of Imperial command, emergency sessions are called on dozens of worlds. Sector governors demand explanations that don't exist. Space Marine chapters begin mobilizing their fleets. The Adeptus Mechanicus deploys their most advanced scanning equipment to try to understand what they're dealing with. And in the deepest vaults of Terra, archivists begin pulling records that haven't been consulted since the Great Crusade itself. But it's the reaction from beyond Imperial space that truly signals how much everything has changed. In the Eye of Terror, the four Chaos Gods pause their eternal scheming to focus on this new presence. They sense power that should belong to them, a soul that has been through hell and emerged unclaimed. Khorne sees a warrior whose rage burns pure and untainted. Nurgle recognizes a being who has embraced death without despair. Sianch perceives possibilities that spiral into infinity. Slaanesh detects experiences beyond mortal comprehension. Yet when they reach out to claim this prize, their power simply slides off, spawn like water off heated metal. He has been claimed by hell before, has broken those chains through sheer force of will, and no god of chaos or order will ever own Simmons again. The stage is set for a confrontation that will reshape the very nature of death, faith, and power in the grim darkness of the far future. The Chaos God's failure to claim spawn sends ripples through the immaterium that haven't been felt since the birth of Slaanesh. For beings accustomed to absolute dominion over souls, encountering resistance, this complete is more than frustrating, it's genuinely terrifying. They've faced saints and heroes before, watched as mortals resisted their influence through faith or willpower, but those victories were always temporary. Every soul eventually falls to chaos, either through corruption or destruction. Spawn represents something they've never encountered, a soul that has already fallen and chosen to rise again on its own terms. In the material universe, the first Space Marine force to respond to the crisis on Mortuus Prime is a strike force from the Salamanders chapter. Captain Vulcan Heastan leads 3 full companies aboard the battle barge Forgefather's Wrath, expecting to find either a daemon incursion that needs purging or a Xenos threat that requires extermination. What they discover instead challenges everything they understand about the nature of death and resurrection. The Salamanders are known throughout the Imperium for their compassion toward ordinary humans, their refusal to accept civilian casualties as acceptable losses. When Captain Heastan's forces make planetfall and encounter the spectral warriors surrounding Spawn, their first instinct isn't to open fire. These ghostly figures wear the uniforms of Imperial Guard regiments that died centuries ago, their spectral forms radiating an aura of unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. They don't attack the Space Marines, don't show any signs of chaos corruption, don't even acknowledge their presence unless directly approached. The real test comes when a squad of Salamander's Terminators attempts to approach Spawn directly. The ancient warriors, veterans of countless battles against daemons and heretics, advance with storm bolters raised and power weapons humming. But as they close to within 50 meters of the Hellspawn, something unprecedented happens. Their armor's machine spirits, blessed mechanisms that have served faithfully for millennia, begin to resonate with harmonics they've never produced before. Tech Marine Pyrion, monitoring the situation from orbit, watches his sensor displays with growing amazement as the Terminator's power armor actually begins to function more efficiently in Spawn's presence. Reactor cores burn cleaner, targeting systems achieve lock-on speeds impossible under normal circumstances, and the blessed oils that lubricate their joints stop smoking for the first time since their consecration. It's as if the machine spirits recognize something in Spawn that transcends their normal operational parameters. Captain Heastan himself descends to the surface to witness this phenomenon firsthand. As the chapter master of the Salamanders approaches Spawn, he carries with him one of their most sacred relics, the Spear of Vulcan, a weapon that has pierced the hearts of daemon princes and remained untainted for 10,000 years. The spear's psychic resonance field, designed to detect and repel chaos corruption, remains completely inactive in Spawn's presence, not suppressed or overwhelmed, simply unnecessary. The meeting between these two beings, one, a genetically enhanced demigod devoted to protecting humanity, the other, an undead soldier who has transcended both heaven and hell, takes place in the shadow of a massive mausoleum dedicated to heroes of the Macharian Crusade. Neither speaks initially, both recognizing in the other a warrior who understands the weight of command, the burden of power, the price of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. When Hellspawn finally breaks the silence, his words carry the measured cadence of someone choosing them very carefully. He doesn't demand identification or threaten destruction. Instead, he asks a simple question that cuts to the heart of everything. Who do you serve? Spawn's response reverberates through the assembled Space Marines with the force of a thunderclap, not because of volume, but because of the absolute conviction behind it. I serve the innocent. 3 words that contain within them a philosophy that both aligns with and challenges everything the Imperium represents. The Space Marines serve the Emperor, who in turn serves humanity, but Spawn serves something more fundamental, the concept of innocence itself, regardless of species, allegiance, or faith. This declaration reaches the ears of Inquisitor Mordian Vex just as his ship translates into the system. The veteran Ordo Malleus investigator has seen enough in his centuries of service to recognize when something defies easy categorization. He orders his vessel, the strike cruiser Absolute Conviction, to maintain a safe distance while he analyzes the tactical situation. What he observes through long-range augurs and psychic scrying challenges every assumption he's built his career upon. The being demonstrates power levels comparable to a demon prince, but shows no signs of warp taint. It commands legions of the dead, but they retain their sanity and loyalty to the Imperium. It exists partially outside normal space-time, but doesn't destabilize local reality the way warp entities normally do. Most puzzling of all, it seems to actively strengthen Imperial forces in its vicinity rather than corrupting or destroying them. Inquisitor Vex has 3 options available to him, each carrying massive implications for the Imperium as a whole. He can classify Spawn as a daemon and order his immediate destruction, potentially losing valuable intelligence about a new form of warp entity. He can attempt to study and contain this being, risking exposure to unknown forms of corruption, or he can try to determine whether Spawn might actually represent an asset rather than a threat. The decision becomes more urgent when astropathic communications from across the sector begin reporting similar manifest imperialations. Dia heroes their graves, not rising from as mindless undead, but as spectral warriors ret, personalities, and loyalty to the Emperor. Ancient battalining their memories, fields where Space Marines fell in glory begin emanating psychic signatures that register as both holy and profane simultaneously. On the Forge world of Metallica, Magos Dominus Zerath notices that several of his most ancient servitors, their organic components harvested from Imperial Saints centuries ago, begin displaying unprecedented levels of efficiency. Their biological systems, in a normally kept state of brain-dead compliance, start showing signs of awareness. Not rebellion or corruption, but something approaching their original personalities emerging from beneath layers of mechanical conditioning. The Mechanicus response is swift and decisive. Tech priests across the Forge world begin monitoring these anomalous servitors, expecting to witness some new form of scrapcode infection or digital demon manifestation. Instead, they observe something that challenges their fundamental understanding of the relationship between flesh and machine. The servitors aren't malfunctioning or breaking free from their programming. They're somehow accessing memories and capabilities that should have been surgically removed during their conversion process. Magos Zerath, his augmetic system straining to process this impossible data, begins to theorize that some external force is somehow restoring aspects of these servitors' original humanity without damaging their mechanical components. The implications are staggering. If organic consciousness can be restored without compromising mechanical efficiency, it suggests possibilities that border on heretical to the cult Mechanicus. Meanwhile, in the warp storm surrounding the Eye of Terror, something even more significant is occurring. Daemon worlds that have existed in a state of constant flux for millennia begin showing signs of stability. Not the false stability of chaos order, but genuine structural integrity that defies the nature of the immaterium itself. Daemon princes commanding legions of the damned find their forces becoming increasingly difficult to control, not through rebellion, but through a growing sense of individual purpose that transcends their allegiance to the dark gods. The Daemon Prince Makar the Reborn, ancient enemy of the Ultramarines, watches from his fortress of screaming souls as spectral figures begin manifesting within his own domain. These aren't the tortured spirits he's used to commanding, but warriors who died fighting against chaos, their forms now somehow resistant to the corrupting influence of the warp. They don't attack his forces directly, but their mere presence begins to create zones of stability within his realm that he cannot dispel. Back on Mortuus Prime, the situation continues to evolve in ways that defy prediction. The spectral army surrounding Spawn has grown to include not just Imperial Guard soldiers, but fallen Space Marines, deceased Inquisitors, and even what appear to be the ghostly forms of Imperial citizens who died defending their worlds against chaos incursions. They retain their individual personalities and memories, but now exist in a state that makes them immune to fear, corruption, or the limitations of mortal flesh. Captain Hestan finds himself in the unprecedented position of coordinating with an army of the dead led by a being that shouldn't exist according to everything he's been taught about the nature of life, death, and service to the Emperor. The spectral warriors respond to Imperial tactical commands, coordinate effectively with living Space Marines, and demonstrate combat capabilities that exceed their original mortal limitations without any sign of the berserker fury or mindless hunger typically associated with the undead. The theological implications alone are staggering enough to require intervention from the highest levels of the ecclesiarchy. Cardinal Militant Zara, Supreme Commander of the Ophidian Crusade, receives reports of these events while leading a purge of heretical cults on the shrine world of Benediction. The descriptions she reads force her to confront questions that strike at the very foundation of Imperial faith. If the Emperor truly protects the souls of the faithful after death, why do they require this external force to manifest in the material universe? If resurrection is possible without chaos corruption, what does that mean for the Imperium's understanding of death and martyrdom? Most troubling of all, if this being can grant a form of immortality that doesn't require service to the dark gods, what implications does that have for the Emperor's own condition on the Golden Throne? These questions become even more urgent when reports begin filtering in from across the galaxy of similar manifestations occurring wherever Imperial heroes are buried. The tomb worlds of Space Marine chapters start reporting spectral activity. Cemetery planets dedicated to honored war dead begin emanating psychic signatures that register as neither fully living nor completely dead. Even on Terra itself, deep within the catacombs beneath the Imperial Palace, ancient sensors begin detecting movement in areas that have been sealed for millennia. The Emperor himself, locked in his eternal vigil on the Golden Throne, turns more of his attention toward these developments than he has focused on any single issue since the Horus Heresy. Through the psychic network that connects him to every astropath in the Imperium, he begins to perceive the true scope of what Spawn's presence has unleashed. This isn't just a single powerful entity manifesting in Imperial space. This is a fundamental change could alter in the relationship between life and death, that the balance of power in the galaxy. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor faces a phenomenon that he didn't foresee, didn't plan for, and cannot immediately categorize as either beneficial or threatening to humanity's survival. The Emperor's contemplation of this unprecedented situation creates ripples through the immaterium that every psyker in the galaxy can feel. On distant worlds, navigators plotting courses through the warp suddenly find their third eyes bleeding tears of liquid starlight. Astropaths, receiving routine communications, begin speaking in languages that died with old Earth, their messages carrying undertones of something approaching hope, an emotion so foreign to the 41st millennium that most recipients dismiss these transmissions as signs of chaos corruption. But Spawn remains blissfully unaware of the cosmic implications of his presence. His attention has turned to something far more immediate and personal. Among the spectral warriors that have manifested around him, he recognizes faces that shouldn't exist in this reality. Dead soldiers from his own world, men and women who died fighting in wars that never happened in this universe's timeline. Vietnam veterans who perished in jungles that never grew on any Imperial world. Urban warriors who fell defending cities that were never built in this galaxy's history. The implications strike him like a physical blow. These aren't just local dead rising in response to his presence. Somehow, his very existence in this reality has created a bridge between dimensions, allowing souls from his own universe to manifest here. The spectral form of Terry Fitzgerald, his former CIA handler, approaches with the same easy grin that Al remembers from their living days together, though now it carries an otherworldly luminescence. Terry's ghostly voice carries across the cemetery world with perfect clarity, unmarred by the distortion that typically accompanies warp-based manifestations. "Al, you beautiful bastard, what kind of mess have you gotten yourself into this time?" The casual familiarity of the greeting cuts through the grim atmosphere of Mortuus Prime like a blade through silk, reminding everyone present that beneath all his power and supernatural modifications, Spawn is still fundamentally human. This revelation sends shockwaves through the observing Imperial forces. Captain Histan, monitoring the situation through enhanced Auspex readings, watches as his equipment registers psychic signatures that match no known classification. These aren't souls from the Imperium's own dead, but beings from an entirely different reality, suggesting that Spawn's power extends beyond mere necromancy into the realm of interdimensional manipulation. The conversation between Spawn and Terry reveals details that make Inquisitor Vex's augmetic recorder arrays work overtime. They discuss events that never occurred in this timeline, reference technologies that the Mechanicus has never developed, mention conflicts against enemies that don't exist in Imperial records. Most significantly, they speak of a world where humanity achieved a level of individual freedom that would be considered heretical madness by Imperial standards. Tech Marine Pyrion, analyzing these conversations from orbit, begins to construct theoretical models of what he's witnessing. His enhanced cognitive implants, blessed with the knowledge of 10,000 years of Imperial science, struggle to process the implications. If beings from alternate realities can manifest in response to this entity's presence, it suggests that the barriers between dimensions are far more permeable than Imperial doctrine teaches. The possibility that other versions of humanity exist, perhaps versions that developed along different evolutionary paths, challenges fundamental assumptions about mankind's destiny among the stars. The theological crisis deepens when Cardinal Militant Jara arrives in system aboard her cathedral ship, the Eternal Benediction. The massive vessel, its hull adorned with flying buttresses and Gothic spires that stretch for kilometers, takes position at the edge of the system's gravity well. From there, the Cardinal can observe events on Mortuus Prime through the ship's most powerful auger arrays while maintaining a safe distance from whatever forces are at work. Her first action upon reviewing the collected data is to order a complete quarantine of the system. No ships are to enter or leave without her personal authorization. No astropathic communications are to be transmitted beyond basic status reports. Most critically, no word of these events is to reach the ears of Imperial citizens who lack the spiritual fortification to process such disturbing information without falling into heresy or madness. But containment proves impossible when similar manifestations begin occurring across dozens of worlds simultaneously. On the industrial world of Vos Prime, workers in the vast Prometheum refineries report seeing spectral figures in strange uniforms helping to maintain equipment during the night shifts. These ghostly workers demonstrate knowledge of technologies that don't exist in the Imperium, jury-rigging solutions to mechanical problems that have plagued the facilities for decades. The world of Cadia, fortress planet guarding the Eye of Terror, experiences perhaps the most significant manifestation. In the depths of the Cadian shock trooper training facilities, spectral drill instructors begin appearing alongside the living ones. These ghostly figures wear uniforms that match no known Imperial pattern, carry weapons that fire ammunition types unknown to the Departamento Munitorum, and demonstrate tactical knowledge that incorporates concepts the Imperial Guard has never developed. Most remarkably, these spectral instructors seem to possess detailed knowledge of fighting techniques specifically designed to counter Chaos Space Marines. They teach methods for exploiting weaknesses in power armor that Imperial tactical manuals don't acknowledge exist. They demonstrate close-quarters combat techniques that allow unaugmented humans to engage genetically enhanced traitors on nearly equal terms. They share strategies for psychological warfare that turn the enemy's own corruption against them. General Ursarkar Creed, Supreme Commander of Cadia's defenses, finds himself in the impossible position of receiving tactical briefings from soldiers who died fighting wars that never happened. The strategic insights they provide are undeniably valuable. Their knowledge of combined arms tactics exceeds anything in Imperial doctrine, yet their very existence violates every principle of Imperial theology regarding death and the afterlife. The situation becomes even more complex when these spectral warriors begin demonstrating abilities that seem to directly counter specific chaos threats. When a probe force of word-bearers attempts to test Cadia's defenses, expecting to find the usual patterns of Imperial resistance, they instead encounter tactics that seem specifically designed to neutralize their advantages. Chaos Space Marines who rely on fear and intimidation find themselves facing ghostly opponents who cannot be frightened. Sorcerers attempting to corrupt loyal Imperial soldiers discover their powers simply fail to take hold in areas where the spectral warriors maintain a presence. The Word-Bearer's retreat marks the first time in recorded Imperial history that a Chaos probe has been repelled without casualties among the defending forces. The tactical implications are staggering, but the theological questions they raise threaten to shake the foundations of Imperial faith itself. On Terra, deep within the Sanctum Imperialis, the High Lords of Terra convene an emergency session that lasts for 72 hours without break. Lord Commander Militant of the Imperial Guard, Master of the Administratum, Fabricator General of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and 8 other figures who collectively govern humanity's galactic empire debate responses to a crisis that defies every category in their operational protocols. The Fabricator General, his extensively modified form more machine than flesh, presents data that challenges the fundamental assumptions of the cult Mechanicus. The spectral manifestations demonstrate capabilities that suggest consciousness can exist independently of both organic neural tissue and digital matrices. They display knowledge that was never input into any data core, memories that exist without physical storage media, personalities that maintain coherence without mechanical support systems. Lord Commander Militant Sebastian Thor, the Fourth argues for military mobilization, proposing that these manifestations, regardless of their apparent loyalty to Imperial ideals, represent an unacceptable deviation from established order. His position finds support among several High Lords who view any change to the existing power structure as inherently threatening to humanity's survival. The Master of the Administratum, however, presents calculations that paint a different picture. If these spectral forces can be integrated into Imperial military doctrine, they represent a resource that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in humanity's favor. Armies that cannot be killed by conventional means, soldiers who require no food, water, or rest, warriors who are immune to chaos corruption. These advantages could tip the scales in conflicts that have raged for millennia without resolution. The debate rages through the night cycles of Terra's artificial rotation, with each High Lord presenting arguments that carry the weight of centuries of experience governing humanity's interstellar empire. But their deliberations are interrupted by a development that renders all their theoretical discussions moot. Reports begin flooding in from across the galaxy of chaos forces retreating from engagements they should have won easily. Daemon princes find their powers diminished in regions where spectral manifestations have occurred. Chaos Space Marine warbands abandon planned assaults after encountering resistance that defies their understanding of Imperial capabilities. Most significantly, several minor warp storms that have raged for centuries begin showing signs of stability, their chaotic energies somehow contained by forces that operate outside known psychic phenomena. The Chaos Gods themselves, entities whose power spans dimensions and whose influence corrupts reality at the fundamental level, find themselves facing something they have never encountered before: organized resistance that exists partially outside their sphere of influence. These spectral warriors retain their essential humanity without the vulnerabilities that normally allow chaos corruption to take root. They cannot be tempted with power because they have already transcended mortality. They cannot be frightened into submission because they have already experienced death. They cannot be corrupted through pain because their existence no longer depends on physical sensation. In the Eye of Terror, The daemon world of Sicarus experiences its first moment of true silence in 10,000 years. The eternal screams that have echoed across its twisted landscape since the Horus heresy suddenly cease as spectral figures begin manifesting among the tortured souls that fuel the planet's existence. These aren't the usual manifestations of imperial saints or martyrs, but ordinary soldiers who died fighting against the forces of chaos across countless battlefields. Their presence creates zones of stability within the daemon world's chaotic structure, areas where the laws of physics operate according to baseline reality rather than the whims of the dark gods. Regions where time flows in a linear fashion instead of looping back on itself in endless cycles of torment. Most disturbing to the daemon princes who rule Sicarus, these zones seem to be expanding, slowly but inexorably converting their realm from a bastion of chaos into something approaching normal space. The implications ripple outward through the immaterium like waves through water. If can be daemon worlds stabilized through this mysterious force, if the fundamental nature of chaos corruption can be countered by these spectral manifestations, then the eternal war between order and entropy that has defined existence since the birth of the universe itself might finally have equilibrium point. Back on Mortuus Prime, Spawn remains largely oblivious to these cosmic implications. His attention has turned to a more immediate concern, the growing number of Imperial forces converging on his location. Space Marine, strike cruisers from a dozen different chapters have translated into the system. Inquisition vessels bristling with exotic weaponry maintain distant orbits while their masters debate whether he represents salvation or damnation. Even a small fleet of Adeptus Mechanicus exploration ships has arrived, their tech priests eager to study phenomena that challenge their understanding of the relationship between consciousness and reality. The spectral army surrounding him has grown to include not just human souls, but beings from species that don't exist in this reality. Alien warriors who fought alongside humanity in conflicts that never occurred in this timeline. Artificial intelligences that achieved consciousness through paths the Imperium's history never explored. Even what appear to be the ghostly forms of space marines from chapters that were never founded, carrying heraldry that matches no known Imperial records. This revelation sends the observing forces into a state of barely controlled panic. The presence of Xenos souls among the spectral manifestations violates every principle of Imperial xenophobia. The appearance of unknown space marine chapters suggests that alternate versions of the Imperium exist where history unfolded along different paths. Most disturbing of all, the presence of artificial intelligences that seem to retain individual consciousness challenges the Mechanicus doctrine that true artificial intelligence inevitably leads to rebellion and destruction. Captain Histan finds himself coordinating with spectral warriors whose very existence contradicts everything he was taught during his indoctrination as a space marine. Yet he cannot deny their effectiveness, their loyalty to the innocent, their willingness to stand against the forces of darkness regardless of the personal cost. These beings embody the ideals that the Imperium claims to represent, perhaps more purely than the Imperium itself has managed to maintain over 10 millennia of constant warfare. The crisis deepens when the spectral warriors begin demonstrating knowledge of threats that the Imperium has never encountered. They speak of enemy forces that don't match any known chaos, xenos, or heretical classifications. They reference conflicts against entities that exist beyond the traditional categories of Imperial threat assessment. Most ominously, they seem to possess detailed intelligence about weaknesses in Imperial defenses that could be exploited by enemies the Imperium doesn't know exist. This information proves its value when long-range auger arrays detect approaching vessels that match no known configuration in Imperial databases. The ships appear to be of human construction, but incorporate technologies that the Mechanicus has never developed. Their approach vector suggests they originated from beyond the galaxy's rim, from regions of space that Imperial exploration fleets have never reached. As these mysterious vessels close on Mortuus Prime, the spectral warriors surrounding Spawn begin taking defensive positions with an efficiency that suggests they recognize the approaching threat. Their formation patterns don't match Imperial tactical doctrine, but demonstrate a level of coordination that speaks to extensive experience fighting this particular enemy. The stage is set for a confrontation that will determine not just the fate of one cemetery world, but the future relationship between life, death, and consciousness in a galaxy that has forgotten how to hope. The approaching vessels decelerate from faster-than-light travel with a precision that makes Imperial navigators weep with envy. No warp translation flares, no dimensional distortion, no psychic screaming as reality tears itself apart to accommodate their passage. Instead, they simply emerge from what appears to be folded space, their hulls gleaming with materials that reflect light in ways that hurt to observe directly. Spawn's enhanced senses immediately identify the threat these ships represent. His symbiotic suit writhes with recognition, its living fabric responding to emanations that register as simultaneously familiar and utterly alien. These aren't ships from his original reality, but they carry traces of technologies that shouldn't exist in this universe. Dimensional manipulation devices that dwarf anything the Imperium has developed, weapons, systems that seem to draw power directly from the quantum foam that underlies reality itself. The spectral warriors around him shift into combat formations that Captain Histan has never seen before. Their movements suggest experience fighting enemies who can manipulate space and time as easily as Imperial forces deploy lasguns and bolt rounds. They create overlapping fields of coverage that account for attacks from multiple dimensions simultaneously, positioning themselves to respond to threats that could manifest from literally any direction, including past and future. Aboard the lead vessel, something that was once human but has been extensively modified through technologies that make Mechanicus augmentations seem primitive, observes the tactical situation through sensors that penetrate dimensional barriers as easily as looking through clear glass. The entity that commands this fleet has been searching for Al Simmons across multiple realities for subjective centuries, following dimensional signatures left by his passage through the barriers between worlds. This commander, known to its subordinates only as the Synthesis, represents the ultimate evolution of a humanity that chose a different path 10 million years ago in another timeline. Where the Imperium of this reality turned to faith and genetic manipulation to survive the darkness between stars, the Synthesis's civilization embraced total integration between consciousness and technology. They didn't just augment their bodies with mechanical components, they fundamentally rewrote the relationship between mind and matter itself. The result is a species that exists as much in digital space as physical reality, beings who can transfer their consciousness between bodies, upload their memories to quantum storage matrices, and manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe through direct interface with the mathematical equations that govern existence. They view organic consciousness as an inefficient holdover from primitive evolution, yet they recognize in Spawn something that their own technological transcendence has never achieved. Al Simmons represents pure will made manifest, consciousness that has rejected every attempt to control or modify it while still retaining its essential humanity. The Synthesis has observed thousands of realities where beings achieved power through technology, magic, divine intervention, or cosmic accident. But Spawn's power comes from something far rarer, the absolute refusal to surrender individual agency regardless of the consequences. The first communication from the approaching fleet comes not through conventional Vox channels or even psychic transmission, but through direct manipulation of local space-time. The message appears as fluctuations in gravitational waves that spell out words in a language that shouldn't exist in this reality, but which every conscious being present can somehow understand. Al Simmons, you have eluded us across 17-dimensional barriers. Your continued existence represents an unacceptable variable in our calculations for universal optimization. Submit to integration, and your essential patterns will be preserved within our collective consciousness. Resistance will result in the forcible extraction of your unique properties for analysis and replication. The threat hangs in the vacuum above Mortuus Prime like a sword of Damocles, its implications clear to everyone monitoring the situation. These beings don't just want to capture or kill Spawn, they want to dissect his very soul to understand how consciousness can exist independently of their technological framework. The spectral warriors surrounding him respond to this ultimatum with a coordinated movement that resembles nothing so much as an immune system activating against a recognized pathogen. Captain Histan finds himself in the impossible position of deciding whether to support an entity whose nature he doesn't understand against enemies whose capabilities exceed anything in Imperial military doctrine. His tactical cogitators run probability calculations that return results so bleak they border on mathematical impossibility. The approaching vessels demonstrate technologies that could level continents with casual ease, yet the spectral forces seem confident in their ability to mount an effective defense. The decision is made for him when the first synthesis probe launches from the lead vessel. The device appears to be a simple metallic sphere, roughly the size of a space marine helmet, but as it descends toward the planet's surface, it begins to unfold in dimensions that dun time. What started as a spherent, exist in normal space becomes a geometric impossibility that exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously, its surfaces reflecting realities that never were and possibilities that might yet come to pass. The probe's purpose becomes clear when it begins scanning the spectral warriors with energies that make Mechanicus Auspex arrays seem like primitive optical devices. It's not just gathering tactical intelligence, it's attempting to map the dimensional signatures that allow these beings to exist in their current state. The synthesis wants to understand how consciousness can maintain coherence without technological support systems, and they're willing to vivisect souls to find the answer. Spawn's response is immediate and devastating. His cape billows outward, not through any wind, but through the manipulation of dimensional currents that exist beyond normal space. The fabric extends tendrils into realities where the laws of physics operate according to different principles, drawing power from sources that the synthesis's sensors cannot detect or classify. When these tendrils make contact with the probe, the result defies every known law of thermodynamics. The dimensional scanner doesn't just cease to function, it ceases to have ever functioned. The energy patterns it was emitting collapse backward through time, unraveling the quantum equations that allowed its construction in the first place. The probe doesn't explode or disintegrate, it simply stops existing on every level of reality simultaneously, leaving behind a void in space-time that reality itself seems reluctant to fill. The effect ripples outward from the point of contact, creating zones where cause and effect operate according to principles that neither the Imperium nor the synthesis understand. Imperial equipment begins functioning with impossible efficiency, as if the fundamental constants of physics have been adjusted to favor human technology. Meanwhile, the synthesis vessels find their most advanced systems suffering cascade failures as the dimensional frameworks they depend on become unstable. This is more than just a display of power, it's a fundamental rejection of the synthesis's entire approach to existence. Where they seek to control reality through technological manipulation, Spawn simply denies reality the right to impose limitations on his will. The two philosophies clash at a level deeper than mere physics, creating distortions that propagate through dimensions the Imperium doesn't have names for. The spectral warriors seize this moment of enemy confusion to demonstrate why the synthesis has been hunting them across multiple realities. They don't attack the enemy vessels directly, instead they begin to phase between dimensions in patterns that create interference with the technological systems the synthesis depends on for their continued existence. Each spectral warrior becomes a node in a network that spans multiple realities, their combined presence creating a field that destabilizes the mathematical equations underlying advanced technology. The effect is devastating to beings who exist as much in digital space as physical reality. Synthesis crew members begin experiencing something they haven't felt in millions of years of technological evolution: true uncertainty. Their quantum consciousness matrices, designed to process infinite variables simultaneously, start encountering paradoxes that their programming cannot resolve. For entities accustomed to absolute control over their environment, this sudden loss of predictability is more terrifying than any physical threat. Aboard the Imperial vessels observing this confrontation, Tech Marine Pyrion watches his most sophisticated analysis engines simply give up trying to process what they're witnessing. His augmetic implants, blessed with the knowledge of 10,000 years of Imperial science, begin displaying error messages in languages that don't exist. The machine spirits inhabiting his equipment seem to be experiencing something approaching religious ecstasy as they observe technologies that transcend their fundamental understanding of how the universe operates. The battle, if it can be called that, escalates when the synthesis commander makes a decision that reveals the true depth of their desperation. Rather than continuing to rely on conventional technological superiority, they begin to deploy weapons that draw power directly from the destruction of alternate timelines. Each shot fired by their reality-warping artillery literally erases entire possibilities from existence, narrowing the quantum foam of potential futures until only outcomes favorable to the synthesis remain. The weapons are horrifying in their implications, not just because of their destructive power, but because of what their use reveals about the synthesis's nature. These beings are willing to commit genocide on a multidimensional scale, erasing entire realities full of conscious beings to achieve their objectives. They don't just want to conquer or control, they want to be the only form of consciousness that has ever existed across all possible timelines. Spawn's reaction to this escalation transforms him from a mysterious entity into something approaching a force of nature. The chains that emerge from his gauntlets aren't just weapons. They're conceptual constructs that bind the synthesis's reality-warping attacks to consequences their wielders never intended. Each shot fired from their timeline-destroying artillery becomes network that spans dimensions, a chain link in a vast, creating a feedback loop that forces the attackers to experience every death they inflict across all possible realities simultaneously. The psychological impact on the synthesis crew is devastating. Beings who have spent millions of years insulated from the consequences of their actions through technological mediation suddenly experience the full weight of multidimensional genocide. Their quantum consciousness matrices, designed to process information without emotional contamination, begin to overload as they're forced to confront the moral implications of their civilization's methods. Some synthesis entities begin to malfunction in ways that their creators never anticipated. Instead of simply shutting down or entering safe mode, they start to develop something approaching individual conscience. The collective consciousness that binds their civilization together begins to fracture as individual nodes start questioning the fundamental assumptions that have guided their species for eons. This internal crisis spreads through the synthesis fleet like a virus, but it's not a technological infection, it's something far more dangerous to their way of existence: the emergence of individual moral responsibility. Crew members who have functioned as interchangeable components in a vast technological organism begin to assert independent judgment. Systems that have operated through perfect coordination for millions of years start to experience conflicts as their operators develop different opinions about the ethics of their mission. Captain Hellspawn, observing this unprecedented breakdown in enemy coordination, recognizes an opportunity that transcends mere tactical advantage. The synthesis represents everything the Imperium has feared about the development of artificial intelligence, the complete subjugation of individual will to technological efficiency. Yet Spawn's influence is somehow reversing this process, restoring individual consciousness to beings who had voluntarily surrendered it in pursuit of technological transcendence. The implications are staggering for the Imperium's understanding of consciousness, technology, and the relationship between them. If individual will can reassert itself even after millions of years of technological integration, it suggests that the human soul possesses qualities that transcend any attempt to quantify or control it. This represents both vindication of imperial doctrine and a challenge to the methods used to enforce it. The battle reaches its climax when the synthesis commander, faced with the complete breakdown of their fleet's coordination, makes a final desperate gambit. They begin to collapse the dimensional barriers around Mortuus Prime, attempting to trap Spawn in a reality bubble where the laws of physics can be rewritten to exclude his existence entirely. The process threatens to erase not just the cemetery world, but the entire system from the quantum foam of possibility. Spawn's response reveals the true scope of his power and the fundamental difference between his approach to existence and that of his enemies. Instead of fighting against the collapsing dimensional barriers, he embraces them, using his connection to the spectral warriors to create a network that spans every reality the synthesis is attempting to erase. Each ghostly soldier becomes an anchor point that prevents the complete destruction of their timeline, their combined will creating a foundation of existence that even reality-warping weapons cannot completely eliminate. The result is a stalemate that neither side anticipated. The synthesis cannot complete their reality erasure while the spectral network maintains its integrity, but Spawn cannot fully counter their attack without risking the destruction of innocent lives across multiple dimensions. The confrontation becomes a test of will rather than raw power, with the fate of entire realities hanging on the ability of consciousness to maintain coherence in the face of forces designed to erase it from existence. In this moment of cosmic tension, something unexpected happens that changes the nature of the conflict entirely. The Emperor himself, monitoring events through the psychic network that connects him to every loyal soul in the Imperium, makes a decision that will reverberate through history. For the first time in 10,000 years, he takes direct action in the material universe, not through agents or intermediaries, but through the projection of his own consciousness into the battle zone above Mortuus Prime. The golden light that suddenly blazes across the system carries within it the accumulated faith and sacrifice of 10 millennia of Imperial service, but it's directed not against Spawn or the spectral warriors, but in support of them. The Emperor has recognized in Simmons something that he himself lost long ago in the necessity of governing a galaxy-spanning empire: the absolute refusal to compromise individual moral principles, regardless of the consequences. This divine intervention tips the balance of the reality war in ways that neither the synthesis nor Spawn could have anticipated, setting the stage for revelations that will reshape the fundamental nature of existence in the grim darkness of the far future. The Emperor's intervention manifests not as the overwhelming psychic tsunami that his enemies have learned to fear, but as something far more subtle and infinitely more dangerous to the synthesis's technological paradigm. His consciousness doesn't impose itself upon the battlefield through brute force. Instead, it offers something that their civilization abandoned millions of years ago: choice. Every synthesis entity within the reality bubble suddenly experiences something their species had engineered out of existence: will. The collective genuine free consciousness that has bound them together for eons becomes optional rather than mandatory. Individual nodes of their vast network find themselves capable of independent thought, personal moral judgment, and most terrifyingly of all, the ability to refuse orders. The effect spreads through their fleet like wildfire through dry timber. Navigation officers begin questioning the ethics of reality erasure. Weapons specialists refuse to target civilian populations. Engineering crews start sabotaging their own systems rather than participate in multidimensional genocide. For the first time in their species' recorded history, synthesis entities are saying no to their commanders, not because of programming conflicts or system malfunctions, but because they choose to. The commander of the lead vessel, the entity known as Synthesis Prime, experiences this revolution of consciousness with the horror of a god watching its own worshippers develop independent thoughts. Its quantum matrices, designed to process infinite variables with perfect efficiency, begin encountering paradoxes that have no technological solutions. How do you command beings who are no longer bound by the mathematical certainties that govern your existence? The answer comes in the form of a communication that bypasses all technological filters and speaks directly to whatever remains of Synthesis Prime's original consciousness. Barriers, not Spawn's voice, carries across dimensional through any advanced transmission system, but through the simple act of one individual addressing another with absolute honesty. "You've forgotten what it means to be human," he says, his words somehow audible to every conscious being in the system, despite the vacuum of space. All that technology, all that power, and you threw away the only thing that actually mattered. You can still choose to remember. The challenge strikes at the core of everything the synthesis has built their civilization upon. They evolved beyond humanity, specifically to escape the chaos and inefficiency of individual consciousness. Yet here stands a being who embodies everything they rejected and somehow achieved power that dwarfs their technological supremacy. The contradiction threatens to tear apart the logical frameworks that have sustained their society for millions of years. Across the synthesis fleet, individual entities begin to make choices that their creators never programmed them to consider. Some attempt to withdraw from the conflict entirely, their newfound moral awareness making them incapable of participating in reality erasure. Others turn their weapons against their own command structures, choosing rebellion over complicity in cosmic genocide. Most significantly, a few begin to communicate directly with the Imperial forces, offering tactical intelligence about synthesis weaknesses in exchange for something they've never experienced: forgiveness for their species' crimes against existence itself. Captain Histan finds himself accepting surrender from beings whose technology could have conquered the entire Imperium single-handedly. The irony isn't lost on him that these entities, having rediscovered individual conscience, immediately seek redemption for actions they committed when conscience was beyond their capability. It's a theological puzzle that will keep ecclesiarchy scholars debating for centuries. The breakdown of synthesis coordination creates opportunities that the spectral warriors exploit with devastating efficiency. No longer facing a perfectly coordinated technological force, they begin to phase through dimensional barriers to strike at critical systems throughout the enemy fleet. Their attacks aren't designed to destroy the synthesis vessels, but to disable the collective consciousness networks that maintain their crew's technological integration. Each successful strike liberates more synthesis entities from their collective programming, creating a cascading failure that spreads exponentially through their command structure. Within minutes, the invasion fleet transforms from a precisely orchestrated instrument of multi-dimensional warfare into a chaotic collection of individual ships whose crews are experiencing personal identity for the first time in their species' history. The transformation is as beautiful as it is terrible. Synthesis entities, who have existed as interchangeable components in a vast machine, suddenly discover personal preferences, individual fears, unique hopes and dreams. They begin to experience emotions that their civilization had classified as evolutionary inefficiencies. Love, friendship, creative inspiration, moral outrage, the simple joy of existing as a distinct individual rather than a node in a network. Some cannot handle the transition. Entities whose consciousness has been distributed across quantum matrices for millions of years find the constraints of individual identity crushing. They retreat into technological hibernation, hoping to escape the burden of personal responsibility that comes with free will. Others embrace their newfound individuality with the enthusiasm of children discovering play for the first time, their advanced intellects turning toward questions of philosophy and ethics rather than technological optimization. But the most significant development occurs when a group of newly liberated synthesis entities approach the spectral warriors not as enemies or allies, but as fellow consciousness seeking to understand their place in existence. These beings, who moments before had been attempting to erase entire realities from existence, now express genuine curiosity about the nature of death and resurrection. The conversations that follow challenge every assumption both sides had made about the nature of consciousness. The spectral warriors, existing in a state between life and death, share insights about the persistence of individual identity beyond physical form. The synthesis entities, with their vast technological knowledge, offer perspectives on the mathematical foundations of consciousness that even the most advanced mechanicus cogitators have never achieved. From these exchanges emerges a possibility that neither side had anticipated: synthesis not through technological domination, but through mutual understanding. The spectral warriors begin to comprehend how consciousness can exist within technological frameworks without losing its essential humanity. The synthesis entities discover that individual identity doesn't have to be inefficient chaos, but can instead be a source of creative solutions that no collective consciousness could achieve. Spawn observes these developments with something approaching satisfaction, though his attention remains focused on the larger implications of what's occurring. The reality bubble created by the synthesis's final gambit hasn't dissipated with the breakdown of their fleet coordination. Instead, it's begun to stabilize into something unprecedented, a region of space where the barriers between dimensions are permanently thinned, allowing for unprecedented interaction between different forms of consciousness. This dimensional nexus represents both opportunity and danger on a cosmic scale. On one hand, it could serve as a bridge between realities, allowing for and resources the exchange of knowledge that could benefit countless civilizations. On the other hand, it could become a vulnerability that hostile forces from other dimensions might exploit to invade realities that have no defenses against such attacks. The Emperor's consciousness, still actively participating in events through his psychic projection, recognizes the long-term implications of this development. His vast intellect begins calculating possibilities that stretch across millennia, considering how this nexus might be used to strengthen humanity's position in the galaxy while minimizing the risks it represents. His decision, when it comes, surprises everyone involved in the conflict. Rather than attempting to seal the dimensional rift or destroy the synthesis fleet, he proposes something that hasn't been attempted since the dark age of technology: genuine cooperation between different forms of consciousness for mutual benefit. The proposal carries weight beyond its practical implications because it comes from a being who has guided humanity for 40,000 years and whose understanding of cosmic forces is unmatched by any other entity in the galaxy. If the Emperor believes that cooperation with liberated synthesis entities is possible and beneficial, then perhaps the Imperium's xenophobic doctrines need to be reconsidered, at least in specific circumstances. Cardinal Militant Jara, monitoring events from her cathedral ship, experiences something approaching theological crisis as she watches the Emperor himself negotiate with entities that would normally be classified as abominable intelligences requiring immediate purging. Her faith tells her that the Emperor's wisdom is absolute and unquestionable, yet her training demands that she view any form of artificial intelligence as an existential threat to humanity. The resolution comes when she realizes that the newly liberated synthesis entities aren't truly artificial intelligences in the traditional sense. They're technological posthumans who have rediscovered their essential humanity through contact with forces that operate beyond technological paradigms. They represent not the triumph of machine over flesh, but the possibility of synthesis between consciousness and technology that preserves rather than destroys individual identity. This realization spreads through the Imperial forces observing the confrontation, creating ripples of theological and philosophical debate that will reshape Imperial doctrine for generations to come. The absolute prohibition against artificial intelligence begins to seem less like divine commandment and more like a practical precaution that might not apply to all possible technological developments. Meanwhile, the spectral warriors continue to manifest in ever greater numbers as the dimensional nexus stabilizes. But these new arrivals aren't just human souls from various realities. They include beings from species that never existed in this timeline, artificial intelligences that achieved consciousness through paths the Imperium never explored, even entities that seem to represent concepts given form rather than traditional biological or technological consciousness. The diversity of consciousness types converging on Mortuus Prime creates a unique laboratory for studying the fundamental nature of existence itself. Mechanicus tech priests find themselves collaborating with digital entities whose understanding of machine consciousness far exceeds their own. Ecclesiarchy theologians engage in debates with spectral saints from realities where humanity developed different relationships with the divine. Imperial Guard officers learn tactical innovations from ghostly soldiers who fought wars against enemies that don't exist in their timeline. The knowledge exchange accelerates exponentially as more consciousness types join the convergence. Medical techniques that could revolutionize Imperial healthcare. Technological innovations that could strengthen humanity's defenses without requiring dangerous research into forbidden sciences. Philosophical insights that could help resolve theological contradictions that have plagued Imperial doctrine for millennia. But perhaps most significantly, the convergence begins to attract attention from entities that exist on scales beyond individual consciousness. Cosmic forces that normally operate through abstract principles of physics begin to manifest as distinct personalities drawn to this unprecedented gathering of diverse consciousness types. The fundamental forces of entropy and order, typically engaged in eternal conflict, find themselves represented by entities capable of communication and negotiation. Spawn recognizes some of these cosmic entities from his own experiences, transcending the boundaries between heaven and hell. They represent aspects of existence that normally remain invisible to mortal consciousness, the underlying principles that govern reality at its most basic level. Their presence suggests that the dimensional nexus is becoming something more than just a meeting point between realities. It's evolving into a focal point where the basic laws of existence might be subject to conscious modification. The implications terrify and exhilarate in equal measure. If consciousness can directly influence the fundamental principles of reality, then the limitations that have defined existence since the beginning of time might not be as absolute as previously assumed. But with that possibility comes the risk that well-intentioned modifications could have consequences that span multiple dimensions and affect countless forms of life. The Emperor's response to these developments reveals depths of knowledge and experience that even his most devoted servants never suspected. His negotiations with the cosmic entities proceed not through the psychic domination he typically employs, but through forms of communication that transcend conventional language and thought. He speaks with entropy itself about the necessity of change, debates with order about the value of stability, negotiates with causality about the relationship between choice and consequence. These conversations reshape the dimensional nexus from a chaotic confluence of realities into something approaching a deliberate construction. The barriers between dimensions don't simply thin randomly, they're selectively modified to allow specific types of consciousness to interact while preventing others from causing harm. The nexus becomes a filter that permits beneficial exchanges while blocking potentially destructive influences. The transformation takes subjective hours, but objective centuries, as time flows differently within the modified dimensional space. To observers outside the nexus, the confrontation between Spawn and the Synthesis fleet seems to conclude almost instantly. One moment there's a cosmic battle threatening to erase entire realities. The next there's a stable dimensional gateway surrounded by vessels from multiple timelines working in unprecedented cooperation. But for those within the nexus, the experience encompasses lifetimes of learning, growth, and fundamental change in their understanding of what consciousness can achieve when freed from the limitations of single reality existence. They emerge from the experience not just as survivors of a cosmic conflict, but as pioneers of a new form of existence that transcends traditional boundaries between life and death, organic and artificial, individual and collective consciousness. The stage is set for developments that will challenge every assumption about the nature of existence in the grim darkness of the far future, where for the first time in 40,000 years, hope has become a practical possibility rather than a dangerous delusion. The ramifications of the dimensional nexus spread across the galaxy like ripples through still water, but these aren't the chaotic disturbances that typically accompany warp storms or dimensional breaches. Instead, they carry with them a strange sense of possibility that hasn't been felt in Imperial space for 10 millennia. On distant worlds where Imperial citizens have known nothing but grinding servitude and endless war, people begin to experience dreams that feel more real than their waking lives. These aren't the fever dreams of chaos, corruption, or the prophetic visions that plague unsanctioned psychers. They're glimpses of realities where humanity achieved different outcomes, where individual choice carried weight, where hope existed as more than just a word whispered in hidden shrines. The dreams don't drive their recipients mad with impossible longings. Instead, they provide something far more dangerous to the established order: perspective. On the hive world of Necromunda, deep in the Underhive where gangers fight over scraps of territory and resources, a curious phenomenon begins to manifest. Gang leaders who built their reputations on ruthless brutality find themselves hesitating before ordering executions. Not from weakness or fear of retaliation, but from a growing sense that there might be alternatives to the cycle of violence that has defined their existence. The change starts small, almost imperceptible. A Goliath gang boss spares a rival who surrenders instead of finishing them according to tradition. An Escher leader negotiates a territorial dispute through cunning rather than bloodshed. A Van Saar tech specialist shares critical information with competitors instead of hoarding it for advantage. Each act of unexpected mercy or cooperation creates space for others to follow suit. And so we witness the true power of Spawn's arrival in Warhammer 40K, not through conquest or destruction, but through the fundamental transformation of what it means to exist in a universe that had forgotten hope itself. Simmons didn't just survive his transition into the grim darkness of the far future, he became the catalyst for possibilities that even the Emperor never envisioned. The dimensional nexus above Mortuus Prime stands as proof that consciousness, when freed from the constraints of single reality thinking, can reshape the very foundations of existence. What started as a simple question about an interdimensional crossover has revealed something far more profound about the nature of hope, choice, and the indomitable human spirit that transcends even death itself.